It's 11:30 at night, you're driving home. Maybe you went out to dinner. Maybe you grabbed drinks with friends. Maybe you just left the gym. Doesn't matter. You see those red and blue lights flash in your rearview mirror and your stomach drops. You pull over, the officer walks up to your window, shines the flashlight on your face, and asks you a question that sounds completely innocent. Where are you coming from? Now here's what you need to understand. What you say in the next 3 seconds will determine the entire course of this traffic stop. Most people answer this question without thinking twice. And that answer, that casual, honest, trying to be helpful answer, is the single biggest reason I've seen people end up in handcuffs. After more than 15 years of defending and fighting criminal cases, I can tell you this one question has destroyed more cases than almost anything a cop can say to you. But I'm not just going to show you why it's dangerous. I'm going to give you the exact words to say instead, word for word. And by the time I break down the law behind it, you're going to wonder why nobody ever taught you this before. Here's what most people don't understand. Where you're coming from is not small talk. It is not friendly conversation. It is a trained interrogation technique, and the officer does not care about your answer. He cares about what your answer reveals. Let me show you exactly how the trap works. Say you tell the officer, I'm coming from a bar. You just gave an admission that you were in a location where alcohol is served. That's going straight into the report. Now he has a reason to start looking for signs of intoxication. Say you tell him, I'm coming from a friend's house. Now he's going to ask what you were doing there. Were you drinking? How long were you there? Who else was there? You just open up an entire line of questioning that didn't exist 5 seconds ago. Say you tell him, I'm coming from work. Sounds harmless, right? Now he knows your route. He knows where you started and where you should be heading. And if your route doesn't match, if you took a detour, if you're in an area that doesn't make sense, that becomes suspicious. Every single answer that you give creates a new thread for the officer to pull. That's the whole point. Where you're coming from is not a question, it is a door. And once you open it, the officer will walk right through. Now I need you to think about this from the officer's perspective for a second. This is a routine for them. They ask this question 20 times a night. They're not listening for your answer. They already don't care where you were. What they're actually watching is your behavior while you answer. Are your eyes glassy? Did you hesitate? Did you stumble over your words? Did you look away? Did it take you too long to respond? Every single one of those things gets written down as a clue in the officer's report. That question isn't a question, it is a behavior test. And you're taking it whether you realize it or not. So trying to come up with the perfect answer is pointless because there's no perfect answer. The question is designed so that every response gives the officer something to work with. But here's where it gets interesting, because the law is actually on your side, and the officer is counting on you never figuring that out. Here's the part nobody knows. You have absolutely no legal obligation to tell a police officer where you're coming from during a traffic stop. None, zero. It's not required by any traffic law in any state. The only thing you're required to provide during a traffic stop or your driver's license, your registration, and your proof of insurance. That's it. The Supreme Court laid this out in Terry v. Ohio back in 1968. An officer can ask you questions during a lawful traffic stop, but you're not required to answer them. The Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution protects you from self-incrimination. And telling an officer where you've been, that can absolutely incriminate you. I was at a bar is incriminating. I was at a party is incriminating. Even I was at a restaurant can become incriminating once they start asking you what you had to drink with dinner. And here's the critical part. Your refusal to answer is not probable cause for anything. Courts across this country have been very clear. Exercising your constitutional right cannot be used as evidence against you. An officer cannot arrest you, detain you longer, or search your car simply because you decline to answer a question you're never required to in the first place. That's why what I'm about to give you is so powerful. Once you hear these words, you're going to realize just how simple this really is. But first, let me show you why you need them. Think about the box you're in. If you answer honestly, I was at a bar, you just incriminated yourself. If you lie, I was at the library, and the officer finds out, that's potentially obstruction. And if you just sit there in silence and stare at the officer, guess what he writes in his report? Suspect was unresponsive and appeared confused. And then he calls that a sign of intoxication. I've seen it happen hundreds of times. So you can't answer honestly. You can't lie, and you can't just sit there. What on earth are you supposed to do? Here are the exact words. Memorize them. Officer, I prefer not to answer questions about where I've been. Am I free to go or am I being detained? That's it. That's the whole thing. Now, let me break down why every single part of this works. I'd prefer not to answer. This is polite. This is respectful. You're not being combative. You're not being rude. You're exercising your Fifth Amendment constitutional right the most professional way possible. And because you said prefer, it sounds like a personal choice, not a confrontation. The officer has no reason to write hostile or uncooperative in his report. Questions about where I've been. Notice what you're doing here. You're not refusing to speak. You're not giving a blanket, I don't answer questions. You're specifically declining to discuss one topic. This is a targeted, narrow refusal. It shows the officer you're willing to be reasonable. You just have a boundary on this one subject. Am I free to go or am I being detained? This is the most powerful question you can ask during any police encounter. It forces the officer to commit. He either has to let you leave or he has to tell you you're being detained. And if he says you're detained, he now has to have a legal justification for that detention. You just put the entire burden back on him. The question changes the dynamic of the stop completely. That question changes the dynamic of the stop completely. Now, what if the officer pushes back? Because they may. They're trained to. If he says, come on, just tell me where you were tonight. If you've got nothing to hide, it's a simple question. Here's your backup line. Officer, I provided my license and insurance. I'm exercising my right. That's not evidence of anything. And that is 100% legally true. The fact that you exercise your constitutional rights cannot be used against you in court, period. But what if it escalates further? What if the officer says, step out of the vehicle? Here's what you need to know. Under the Supreme Court case, Pennsylvania versus Mims, an officer can require you to exit your car during a lawful traffic stop. You comply with that. You step out, you're polite, but you do not answer questions. You do not consent to any searches. If they ask to search your car, you say this, I do not consent to any searches. If they keep asking you questions, you say this, I'd like to speak with an attorney before answering any more questions. Stay calm, stay polite, stay silent. The fight is not just on the side of the road at 11:30 at night. The fight is in the courtroom with your attorney present. Now here's why this matters beyond just a traffic stop. Because the same exact thing happens in stores every single day. Loss prevention walks up to you, a manager pulls you aside, they start asking questions that sound casual, but they're not. They're trying to get you to talk your way into a charge, into arrest. And just like on the side of the road, most people don't get in trouble because of what they did, they get in trouble because of what they said. In the next video, I'm going to break down theft and shoplifting cases, and more importantly, why taking a conviction in those cases can follow you for years. Jobs, background checks, even housing. If you think it's just a small charge, that's exactly where people make the biggest mistakes. Watch that video next so you know what's actually at stake before you ever make a decision.